On the day I was supposed to be the happiest woman alive, I walked in on my fiancé in bed with my own sister. And believe me, that wasn't even the worst part. Stay with me while I tell you what happened, because this isn't just about heartbreak. It's about seeing people you trust rip your world apart in the cruelest way. It was my engagement party in Boston. The hall glowed with soft golden lights, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. I wore the dress I had dreamed of for months. My parents looked proud, my friends were smiling, and for a moment, I thought my life was exactly how I had imagined it would be. Ryan, my fiancé, had been by my side most of the night, greeting guests, laughing at my jokes, holding my hand. But halfway through, I noticed he was gone. I thought maybe he stepped outside for a call. A few minutes later, I realized my sister Chloe was missing too. Something inside me tightened. Chloe and I had always been close, but in the past few months, she'd been acting different, distant one moment, overly sweet the next. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I decided to look for them. My heels clicked against the polished wood floors as I walked through the quieter parts of the house. Most of the rooms were empty, but when I reached the upstairs hallway, I heard muffled laughter. I followed the sound to the guest bedroom. The door wasn't fully shut. I pushed it open just enough to see, and my whole body froze. There they were, Ryan and Chloe. Their clothes were messy, hair tangled, skin flushed. It wasn't just an innocent moment. It was intimate. It was betrayal, raw and sharp. Ryan looked up, and instead of shock or guilt, there was this half-smile, like he was caught but didn't care. "Emma, it's not what it looks like," he said, his voice dripping with fake calm. Chloe didn't even try to hide her smirk. She pulled the blanket around her and leaned back, as if she was enjoying watching me break. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could hear was the sound of champagne glasses clinking and guests laughing downstairs, completely unaware that my life had just been smashed to pieces upstairs. I finally stepped back, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the railing as I walked down the stairs. People smiled at me, thinking I was just the glowing bride-to-be. They didn't know that in that moment, I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside and stolen everything warm and safe I'd ever had. That night, in the middle of the party meant to celebrate my future, my family and the man I loved tore it apart. My legs felt like they were moving on their own as I hurried downstairs, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. All I could think about was finding my parents and telling them what I'd just seen, because surely they would be just as shocked and furious as I was. I spotted them near the buffet table, chatting with a few relatives. My mother's face lit up when she saw me, but the smile faded when she noticed how pale I looked. I grabbed her arm, my voice trembling. "Mom, Ryan and Chloe, they're upstairs. Together. In bed." I expected her eyes to widen in anger, maybe even for her to march up there herself. Instead, she sighed like I'd just told her something inconvenient. "Emma," she said softly, "it's not as bad as you think, honey. You need to calm down." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard her right. "Not as bad as I think. Mom, I caught them." My father stepped in, his voice low. "Emma, this is a family event. We need to think about keeping the family together, not tearing it apart over mistakes." He wouldn't even meet my eyes. Before I could respond, Chloe came down the stairs. Her hair was messy, cheeks flushed, but she wore this smug little smile like she'd won something. "Emma," she said sweetly, "I know you're hurt, but you and Ryan, you were never right for each other. He's always loved me. We just couldn't fight it anymore." My stomach twisted. "Always loved you. Chloe, you're my sister." Ryan appeared behind her, straightening his shirt. "It just happened," he said, shrugging like this was some minor misunderstanding. "We didn't plan it. We couldn't fight the connection." I looked at my parents, waiting for them to step in, waiting for anyone to say this was wrong. Instead, my mother put her hand on my arm. "You need to think about what's best for all of us, Emma. We can get past this if you just forgive them. We should move forward as a family." Her words hit me harder than what I'd seen upstairs. Forgive them? They wanted me to smile through this, pretend it never happened, and share a table with the two people who had just stabbed me in the heart. The music from the party seemed distant now, muffled under the pounding in my ears. Laughter, clinking glasses, the sound of people celebrating a future that no longer existed. I felt like the walls were closing in. My chest was so heavy I could barely breathe. Without another word, I grabbed my bag from the coat rack and walked toward the door. No one followed me. No one called my name. I stepped out into the cold night air, the sound of the party fading behind me, and realized I had never felt more alone in my life. I sat on my living room floor, knees pulled to my chest, surrounded by piles of unopened engagement gifts. Pretty boxes wrapped in silver paper, bows tied perfectly, cards wishing us a lifetime of happiness. I couldn't even bring myself to touch them. They felt like decorations for a wedding that belonged to someone else, not me. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. My phone buzzed every now and then with missed calls and unread messages, but I didn't check them. I couldn't. Every sound felt like another reminder of the life I was supposed to have. I kept replaying the party in my head. Ryan's hand on the small of my back, his easy smile when we greeted guests together. The way Chloe had winked at him earlier that evening when she thought I wasn't looking. I brushed it off at the time, telling myself I was being paranoid. Now it was like every little thing I had ignored had been trying to warn me. Memories started flooding in, one after another. Late nights when Ryan would call and say, "I have to stay at the office," and Chloe would magically show up with a bottle of wine to keep me company. Times I'd walk into a room, and they'd stop talking mid-sentence. Moments when Ryan would defend Chloe during harmless arguments, almost like her feelings mattered more than mine. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't sudden. This betrayal had been slowly building for months, maybe even longer. I had just been too blinded by love and too trusting to see it. The ache in my chest was sharp, almost unbearable. But as the hours passed, something began to shift inside me. The tears that had been threatening to spill dried up. My breathing slowed. And instead of collapsing under the weight of what they'd done, I felt something else rising, something steadier, colder. Resolve. They had taken so much from me already. My relationship, my trust, my sense of family. But I wasn't about to let them take my dignity too. I wasn't going to spend the next few weeks hiding under a blanket, letting them laugh about how emotional I was. No. I looked around at the unopened gifts and thought about how Ryan and Chloe probably felt like they'd won. Maybe they were sitting together right now, talking about how easy it had been. Maybe they thought I would just disappear quietly. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. They had no idea who they were dealing with. In that quiet apartment, with the city lights glowing faintly through the blind, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't just get over this. I wouldn't just move on. I would make them regret underestimating me, and I would make sure the cost of betraying me was higher than they could ever afford. The next morning, I woke up with that same hollow feeling in my chest, but it wasn't as crushing as the night before. Maybe because now I had a direction. I wasn't going to let this go. If Ryan and Chloe thought they could betray me and live happily ever after, they were about to learn the hard way how wrong they were. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't seen in years, Noah Parker. Back in college, Noah had been the kind of guy you didn't mess with. Smart, confident, and absolutely ruthless when it came to winning an argument. Now, he was a lawyer with a reputation for tearing people apart in court. If anyone could help me, it was him. When he answered, his voice was warm but sharp, like he was already reading between the lines. "Emma Lawson, it's been a while. What's going on?" I didn't bother sugarcoating it. I told him everything, from catching Ryan and Chloe in the bedroom to my parents telling me to move forward as a family. By the time I finished, my hands were clenched into fists. Noah didn't interrupt. He just let me speak until the words ran out. Then he said, "First thing, don't do anything impulsive. If you want to hurt them, do it clean. Do it smart." His words sank in. This wasn't about shouting or throwing things. It was about dismantling them piece by piece. We met that afternoon at his office. He slid a folder across the desk toward me. "I looked into Ryan's finances," he said, "and you're going to want to see this." Inside were bank statements, property documents, and notes that made my stomach twist. Ryan had been trying to push me into merging our accounts for months before the wedding. I thought it was just about planning our future together. In reality, he'd been drowning in debt, and marrying me would have given him a financial lifeline. Then Noah pointed to a document with a real estate company's logo. "They're in the process of buying a house. And guess what? Part of the down payment is coming from your prepaid wedding fund." I felt my jaw tighten. The money I had saved for our dream day, the one Chloe had destroyed, was now going toward their cozy little home. I sat back in the chair, taking a deep breath. "Noah, I don't just want my money back. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them to lose what they think they've won." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then we'll make sure they don't even see it coming." As I left his office, the cold winter air bit at my cheeks, but I barely noticed. I had a plan forming, and this was only the first step. They wanted comfort? I'd take it from them piece by piece until all they had left was regret. 2 days later, I walked into my bank with a calm smile that didn't match the storm inside me. The teller probably thought I was just another customer handling routine business. She had no idea I was pulling the rug out from under two people who thought they had me fooled. Noah had told me the timing was crucial. The house Ryan and Chloe were trying to buy wasn't fully paid for yet. Part of the down payment was sitting in an account with my name still on it, money that had originally been for our wedding. If I moved quickly and quietly, I could take back every last dollar before the sale closed. I signed the withdrawal forms with steady hand. The teller counted out the transfer, and within minutes, my money was safe in an account only I could touch. No notice to Ryan, no warning, just gone. By the time they found out, it would be too late. That same afternoon, Noah called with more news. Ryan's business is a mess, he said. He's been losing clients for months, and the only thing keeping him afloat was the idea of marrying you. He was banking on your money and your connections to save him. Hearing it made me sick, but it also lit something inside me. All those sweet words, all that talk about building a life together, it had been nothing more than a lifeline. And Chloe? She was probably just the cherry on top of his selfish little plan. Still, I wanted more than just financial damage. I wanted proof. I wanted something so damning that when the moment came, they couldn't talk their way out of it. That's when I called Mason Reed. He was a private investigator Noah had worked with before, quiet, thorough, and expensive. I didn't care about the cost. Mason met me at a small coffee shop downtown. He wore a dark coat and spoke in short, direct sentences. "You want to know how far back this goes?" he said, jotting notes in a leather-bound book. "Yes," I told him. "I want to know everything they've done behind my back." A week later, Mason slid a thick envelope across the table to me. Inside were photos, text message logs, and hotel receipts. My hands tightened as I flipped through them. The truth was worse than I imagined. Chloe and Ryan had been seeing each other long before he proposed to me. In some of the photos, Chloe was wearing clothes I recognized from times she'd told me she was just staying home. I closed the envelope and took a deep breath. This wasn't the moment to use it. Not yet. Noah was right. The best revenge was slow, deliberate, and devastating. I tucked the envelope into my bag like a loaded weapon, knowing that when I finally pulled the trigger, they wouldn't have a single place to hide. I hadn't seen my parents since the night of the engagement party, but if I wanted my plan to work, I had to play the part. So I called my mother, using my most even, almost hesitant voice, and told her I wanted to try to make things right. She jumped at the chance, inviting me over for dinner that same weekend. When I arrived, the house smelled like roast chicken and buttered rolls. My mother greeted me with a warm hug, my father with a stiff nod. And of course, Ryan and Chloe were already there, sitting side by side at the table like nothing was wrong. Chloe had her hair perfectly curled, her arm draped casually over Ryan's chair. He didn't even look at me when I walked in. I smiled, polite and calm, and took my seat. We started with small talk, my mother asking about work, my father mentioning the weather. I waited until the wine had been poured, and everyone seemed comfortable before I dropped my first pebble into the pond. "I heard some strange things about Ryan's business recently," I said lightly, as if it were just idle gossip. "Nothing serious, I'm sure, but you know how people talk." My father glanced up from his plate. "What sort of things?" he asked, his tone curious but cautious. "Oh, just rumors," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Something about missed deadlines, unhappy clients." I didn't believe it at first, but then someone mentioned you were thinking of investing, Dad, and I thought maybe you'd want to check things out yourself. Across the table, Chloe's smile wavered. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "Ryan's business is fine. People are just jealous of what we have." Ryan finally looked at me, his expression sharp. "I don't know where you're getting this information, but you should be careful about spreading lies." I leaned back, feigning innocence. "Of course. I'm sure it's nothing. I just wouldn't want my family to get caught up in someone else's mess." The tension thickened like fog. My father didn't say much after that, but I could see the way his eyes narrowed slightly, the way his mind was already turning over the possibility that maybe I was telling the truth. Dinner went on with forced smiles and stilted conversation. Chloe kept trying to pull the focus back to her and Ryan, talking about the house they were so close to buying, how happy they were. Every time she mentioned their plans, I could feel the faintest flicker of irritation in Ryan's expression, like the cracks between them were already starting to show. By the time dessert was served, everyone was smiling again, but it was brittle, like thin glass ready to shatter with the slightest pressure. I left that night knowing I had planted exactly what I needed, doubt. And doubt, when left to grow, could be far more destructive than any direct attack. It started with a single phone call. I had all the documents I needed. Noah had helped me gather them, and I made sure my voice couldn't be traced. I called one of Ryan's biggest clients, a company that had been working with him for years, and I told them exactly where to look if they wanted to see proof of his creative accounting. I didn't lie. I didn't have to. The truth was damning enough. Within a week, Ryan lost the account. It wasn't just a client. It was one of the contracts keeping his business afloat. Losing them was like cutting off one of his lifelines. From a distance, I watched the cracks spread. Chloe had quit her job the moment she decided she was Ryan's future, assuming his income would cover everything. Now, without that major client, the bills started piling up. I heard from a neighbor of my parents that Chloe had been complaining about unexpected expenses and tight months ahead. Then came the house deal. I knew it was only a matter of time before they ran into the missing down payment. Sure enough, the sale collapsed before it was finalized. Ryan had apparently tried scrambling for alternative financing, but with his income looking unstable, The bank didn't want to take the risk. The home they'd been boasting about for weeks slipped right through their fingers. The beauty of it all was that I didn't need to confront them, didn't need to gloat. I stayed completely out of sight, letting their lives crumble piece by piece. I didn't send a single text or make a single call. The silence was deliberate, and it was driving them mad. I imagined the arguments they must have been having behind closed doors. Chloe, used to playing the spoiled younger sister, suddenly faced with a shrinking bank account. Ryan, desperate to hold on to a life he thought he'd secured. Every time I pictured it, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was justice, slow and thorough. Then one night it happened. My phone buzzed after midnight. I almost didn't check it, but when I saw Ryan's name flash across the screen, I hit ignore and let it go to voicemail. His voice came through moments later, slurred and uneven. "Emma, I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I just need a fresh start. We need each other. Please call me." I sat there in the dark, listening to it twice. The desperation in his tone was nothing like the smug arrogance he'd worn at the engagement party. I didn't delete the message. I saved it, tucking it away like ammunition. Ryan didn't know it yet, but that voicemail would be the final nail in his coffin, proof of everything he'd lost and how far he'd fallen. And I wasn't done with him. Not yet. The invitation came from my mother, a small family dinner, to celebrate my father's birthday. I almost didn't go, but the timing was perfect. I had been waiting for the right stage, and this was it. A room full of relatives, my parents playing host, and both Ryan and Chloe guaranteed to be there. I arrived early, carrying a small flash drive in my purse. My parents had set up a projector in the living room to run a slideshow of old family photos after dessert. I knew exactly where to slip in a few extra slides without anyone noticing. Dinner was as stiff as I expected. Chloe laughed too loudly at everything Ryan said, and my parents wore that smug air they'd carried since siding with. I smiled politely, chatting with my cousins, pretending the tension wasn't thick enough to cut. When dessert was served, my father's favorite pecan pie, my mother dimmed the lights and the slideshow began. Old pictures flashed on the wall, childhood birthdays, summer barbecues, Christmas mornings. Then, without warning, the images shifted. The first photo was grainy but unmistakable. Ryan and Chloe outside a hotel, her hand in his, months before my engagement. Then another, this time of them kissing in a parking lot. And another in a restaurant booth, their faces far too close for just friends. The room went dead silent. Forks froze midair. I could hear Chloe's sharp inhale from across the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyes darted to me, wide and unblinking. Ryan's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, the next slide went black. A moment later, my voice filled the room, or rather, his voice pulled straight from my phone. "Emma, I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I just need a fresh start. We need each other. Please call me." It was the drunken voicemail, his desperation echoing against the wall. No one spoke. The air felt heavy, the kind of silence that pressed down on you. When it ended, I looked straight at my parents. "That's the man you told me to forgive. That's the sister you told me to move forward with as a family." My voice was calm, almost too calm. From the corner of my eye, I saw my aunts whispering, their faces tight with judgment. My uncle shook his head, muttering something under his breath. My parents' expressions shifted from smug to pale and stricken, like they were finally beginning to understand the mess they'd chosen to defend. Chloe pushed her chair back, muttering something about me being vindictive, but no one jumped to defend her this time. Ryan sat frozen, his face drained of color. I didn't stay for coffee. I picked up my purse, wished my father a happy birthday, and walked out, leaving them all in that thick, uncomfortable silence. Exactly where I wanted them. It didn't take long for the story to spread, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Families like mine thrived on gossip, and when something juicy came along, it traveled faster than wildfire. By the following Sunday, the whispers had made their way through the pews at church. Neighbors who once waved at my parents now gave them tight, awkward smiles. And Ryan's name was being spoken in the same hushed tone reserved for scandal. The best part? None of it was online. There were no angry Facebook posts or viral tweets. This was the kind of gossip that stuck deeper. The kind that lived in quiet conversations over coffee, in lingering glances at the grocery store, in murmurs exchanged in the church parking lot. People didn't just hear the story. They carried it, adding their own little spins until it became a permanent stain. Ryan's business took the hardest hit. The client he lost after my anonymous tip was just the beginning. Once the rest caught wind of his integrity issues, they started pulling out one by one. Within a month, his client list had thinned to nothing. He went from being a man with a tailored suit and a schedule full of meetings to someone with too much free time and not enough income to fill it. Chloe didn't escape unscathed either. Without Ryan's money, and with the house deal dead, she had to go back to work. But the job she landed was a far cry from the glamorous life she'd been chasing. A low-paying retail position, folding clothes and smiling at customers, while the same women who once envied her now pitied her. I heard from a distant cousin that she'd been spotted on her lunch break, sitting alone in the food court, scrolling through her phone like she was searching for a way out. Meanwhile, I moved forward. I accepted a new job offer in New York, a position I'd been eyeing for months, but had put on hold because I thought I'd be planning a wedding. The day I signed the offer letter, I booked a one-way ticket. My new apartment was nothing like the cozy little place I'd left behind. This one had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, sleek furniture, and the kind of quiet that felt like freedom. Each morning, I drank coffee with the city spread out before me, the noise and chaos below kept at a comfortable distance. I didn't gloat. I didn't send any messages to let them know how well I was doing. I didn't have to. The silence was louder than any victory speech. I knew they heard about my move through the same whisper network that had destroyed them. And I knew every time they pictured me here, thriving, untouchable, it would sting worse than anything I could ever say to their faces. It was a rainy Thursday evening when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone. My circle in New York was small by design, and the doorman usually buzzed before sending people up. When I opened the door, I froze. Chloe stood there, drenched from the storm, her hair plastered to her face, mascara streaking like black tears. She looked nothing like the woman who had smirked at me in my own engagement dress months earlier. This Chloe was hollow-eyed, trembling, and desperate. "Emma, please," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know where else to go. For a moment, I simply leaned on the doorframe, studying her. My mind flashed back to every fake laugh, every smug glance, every time she'd just dropped by when Ryan was around. I remembered the night my parents told me to forgive her, the sickening realization that they'd chosen her comfort over my pain. "I lost my job again," she went on, twisting her hands together. "Ryan's gone. I can't pay my rent. I thought maybe you could help me, just until I get back on my feet." The storm outside roared against the glass behind me, but inside, the silence was deafening. I could see the faint spark in her eyes, that hope that maybe I was still the same Emma she could manipulate. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I took a slow breath and stepped just enough into the doorway for her to feel the weight of my gaze. "You taught me not to trust family," I said, my voice low but steady. "I'll never forget that lesson." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Then I closed the door. Not slammed, just a firm, deliberate shut, the kind that left no room for second chances. I stood there for a moment, leaning against the cool wood, listening to the sound of her footsteps retreating down the hall. There was no rush of triumph, no spike of adrenaline, just a calm, unshakable certainty that I had made the right choice. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of wine, the deep red swirling like a quiet victory in the glass. I walked to the window, watching the lights of the city blur in the rain, the world moving on without her, without any of them. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closing a chapter that had bled me dry. I sipped the wine, the taste warm and grounding, and allowed myself the smallest of smiles. They didn't just lose me. They lost the best life they ever could have had. What about you? If you were in Emma's place, would you have closed that door for good, or given Chloe another chance? Share your thoughts below. I'm curious to hear your take. And if you like reading stories filled with drama, twists, and real emotions, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new one drops.